Yeah, I'm ready.
What's up? Welcome to a new episode of Movie Schmovie. This is episode number 428. My name is Steve. I'm one of the co-hosts of the show, and as always, I'm joined by.
Ron.
We're all dying. The world is one big hospice with fresh air. John.
Yeah, that's John.
Yeah.
Good to see you guys.
Can you tell that I have a totally American accent and I don't sound like a person from the British Isles who's trying to sound American at all?
Why are you hating on him so much, John?
I'm not hating on anything. I love that man. That's just one of the
We,
funniest
we
things
do
about him.
love
Yeah,
we do love him.
he really does do that. But yeah, he's so good, man. He's such a good actor.
He's like Benedict Cumberbatch in that he's a fantastic actor, and the one thing that doesn't so much trip him up, but it's just like there's no hiding it. They're they're over the pond qualities are
Yeah.
too strong for any American accent to contain them.
It's crazy because typically across the pond, their finest export is down south accents for some reason.
Oh yeah, sure.
They just kill the down south accents. For some reason, people within the United States can't pull it off quite like people overseas. And yeah, he just
Yeah,
it's a
Yeah,
good,
the thick Scottish doesn't help, you know.
yeah,
Like,
it
right,
doesn't help.
exactly.
I feel like it's a fair exchange for incredible acting, though.
Oh no,
That's- yeah.
I've loved Ewan McGregor from day one of knowing who he was. I think the first
Yeah.
thing I remember seeing him in was I've always remember the order of the cook, his wife,
oh yeah,
the thief, the cook, his
His
wife, and her
wife,
lover,
yeah.
something
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that. Whatever the order of, he's in that. And I remember thinking he was really good in that. So
Hmm.
no, but yes, we did watch a film with him in it. So that's why that was being discussed. I wasn't just hating on our man Ewan.
Yeah, that
People
was
will
actually
come
just
for
the
you,
cold. That was
honestly.
just the cold open for our spin-off podcast.
Yeah,
McGregor Schmcgregor.
Ewan Schmewen.
Here we go. Ewan McGregor, Conor McGregor, all the McGregors. We cover them
Oh,
in every
Yeah.
episode.
Oh, yeah.
I'd watch that. So all of them in a movie together.
Watch it, Ronald. You'd be on it. I think part of this premise is we'd have the full cast of Movie Schmovie on this spinoff, this limited spinoff.
Obviously, goes without saying.
The McGregors.
Excuse me. Yeah, so we are back to our normal format. We're on the other side again of the Halloween. Watch them all. Right in the middle of spooky season. And yeah, at the end of the episode, Ronald, his required viewing pick for this episode was Mike Flanagan's sequel to The Shining, 2019's Doctor Sleep. Clearly an adaptation of the Stephen King novel. But yeah, Flanagan, we're hot for the man, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
this pod is hot for the Flanagan.
Yeah.
So when you mentioned that, it was like, yeah, that's a good pick, man. Like, let's get into that, especially because there's some conflicting reports on whether you had seen it, not seen it,
Yeah.
what versions, which clips, in which succession. So
Yeah.
catch us up with where you were before we discussed it and where you are now on today's podcast.
Okay. My wife, an avid
My wife.
my wife, and
Sorry.
an avid book reader and audiobook listener, ingested Dr. Sleep a couple years ago. Now I know this for a fact. My child didn't exist. So there was definitely 2 years ago, at least 2 years ago, that it was seen in front of me. Now, what would happen though?
You're
if
still
you-
using this vague language.
well, there's a reason for that. I don't watch anything that's in front of me necessarily because listen, man, like during
But
the
what they don't
pandemic-
know about you is we only play movies behind
No,
you,
no,
and
no.
you wear these goggles that
no,
project-
no, they
Ronald
talk,
is a gecko.
No,
He's
they
got
talk-
eyes. That,
they
on
talk
the
about
sides
this
of
during
his
during the pandemic.
Or
You don't love
geckos?
anybody if you
Chameleons.
can't
One
consume
of them.
anything in front of somebody and not pay attention. There's a type of love language that exists between couples where you can do two separate things in front of each other and it not really affect the other. And one of the things that used to happen pretty frequently is I used to make these videos about how to stay sane during during lockdown.
Mhm.
Whilst Aaron would consume movies at a pretty alarming rate. We would both kind of do that. But typically, she would watch a movie. that I didn't want to watch, and then I would be editing, and so I remember hearing sounds. I remember that it was a direct sequel to you know,
The
The
Shining.
Shining. And this is, the book came out a couple years beforehand, like 2013, 2014 or something like that. And then Dr. Sleep came out 2019. I distinctly remember how big of a deal it was that no one knew what it was. And part of it maybe is because it should have maybe been called The Shining 2 Dr. Sleep. And
I
this is
believe we
only,
had this exact conversation before on the show
yeah.
when you had watched it, and we all knew you had watched it. So I don't know why we had this collective memory lapse about Ronald having talked about this movie.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's something that honestly,
Well, I think it was because I think on the last episode he said he hadn't watched it.
right.
Yeah, but
You might be
That'll-
right.
that'll
That's
do
why
it.
we.
it was watched in front of me, is what I should maybe have said. But for
Okay.
sure, this time I watched it. Especially, I sat down, turned off all my devices, and watched the 3 hour director's cut of Mike Flanagan, Towson Tiger, Mike Flanagan's movie, uh, Doctor Sleep. And I'm a big fan of The Shining, so I didn't know where this fit into all of it, but it follows the young boy that was almost murdered by his father quite a while later in his life, and he's down on his luck, and he develops this connection with somebody he doesn't know where she is, but who may have the shine like he has the shine. Which is an incredible idea that there are other people. I mean, he was told by the older gentleman that other people exist in this world with the shine. And I'm curious to know, maybe if John, you did you read the Shining book? I've always wanted to know what the shine was described as in the Shining book, because it's always like the movie and the book apparently very distinctly different in that way.
Not in that way.
Okay.
I mean, I think the shining that you understand from the movie, which is a very vague thing anyway, is sort of the same thing in the book. The idea that
Okay.
Danny has this ability that makes him like an antenna for ghost activity, is what it seems like, or for like psychic activity or psychic marks, imprints. I believe the book goes into this idea of ghosts being like an imprint that was left on a place in a way. And so the reason why murders and crazy things happening cause all these ghosts to be stuck in a place is because of it being this thing, this huge event, an emotional or extreme event, and that's kind of what people with the shine can kind of clue into, is the sort of human experience that's passed through this place. That's kind of my memory of it, that it's like an intellectualization of ghosts in that way.
Oh, okay.
But then the premise of the book, that much more so than the movie, is that like the ghosts of the hotel are hungry for Danny, and want Danny, and like getting Jack Torrance to kill his son is like the way they get Danny to be trapped there as a ghost.
Okay.
And so,
Gotcha.
like in the movie, that's pretty lost. Like you don't really have that sense in the movie. You sort of feel like Jack Torrance is falling into a pattern of people that go crazy and kill their families, and that it's the hotel that's like he's stuck there in a kind of reincarnation loop or something. In the book, it's it's got more of the lore and the mythos that this movie plays with, which is Stephen King's world building stuff that I think that Stanley Kubrick really wasn't that interested in. Like Stanley Kubrick thought that inherently there's something optimistic about ghosts because it suggests that life exists beyond death, and so he didn't see it as inherently scary. He saw it as inherently kind of optimistic to say, oh, death isn't final, but he approached it in that kind of intellectual way of a guy who doesn't really believe that death, that there's anything beyond necessarily. And then I think Stephen King was, when he wrote The Shining, was in the throes of alcoholism and dealing with that through the character of Jack Torrance. And then when he wrote Dr. Sleep, he was trying to present a more hopeful angle on the similar battle of someone who has, he's now sober, and he wanted to reflect that. But as far as like the way that Mike Flanagan made a movie that is a sequel to The Shining, the film, but it's also an adaptation of a book that it's the sequel to a book that wasn't really what the story of The Shining was. Like
Yeah.
Doctor Sleep is the sequel to the book The Shining that had so many differences in terms of how it ended and
Mm.
the, characters that lived or whatever. Dick Halloran lives in the book and dies in the movie. The hotel blows up or burns down at the end of the book and is intact at the end of the movie. So in the sequel to the book, it reflects those changes. Well, Mike Flanagan, I don't know. I just think the way that he made a film that is a sequel to the movie that everyone knows and thinks of as a classic, but he also managed to bring in themes that were abandoned from the books,
Right.
and somehow satisfy even Stephen King, who thought the movie did a neat job of all that. That like he understood even though Stephen King doesn't love Stanley Kubrick's Shining as an adaptation, I think he understood that Mike Flanagan had the duty of following that movie up as much as adapting his book. So it's an interesting thing, that difference there. I have not read Dr. Sleep. I have read The Shining. I can see why Stephen King would feel that it's not adapted as closely as he would like based on the way that Stanley Kubrick approaches it. But I also think that Stanley Kubrick adapted some of the things that made the book scary are part of what make that movie sort of primarily scary. I don't personally find Dr. Sleep to be a very scary movie. I think it's got some creepy stuff in it, and it's got some like depressing, deep thoughts that are kind of scary to ponder because it's existential scariness about death and what might happen beyond. But I don't find Dr. Sleep to be anywhere near the scary movie. Like The Shining still rattles me on some level, and Dr. Sleep is almost like an X-Men movie or a superhero movie or something, where the ability to shine is sort of treated like this, and like the Phoenix power or something. It's
Right,
this
yeah.
extreme psychic
strong
power
gift.
that then these vampires are interested in. So as much as I love Dr. Sleep, I also don't really. I think the coolest thing about it is how much it is not a tonal sequel to Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. It's not really trying, except for when it's, in the hotel and it's trying to remind you of specific shots and setups. It's not really trying to cop the style of a Stanley Kubrick film. It's very Mike Flanagan. It almost feels like one of his television shows, frankly.
It really does.
But anyway, Ronald, what do you make of all that? I know that you know The Shining as a movie, but I mean, do you come at this as a person who's ever read a Stephen King book?
No, I've never read a Stephen King book, but I'm kind of I've kind of gotten into Audible, and I think I'm gonna try to grab a couple and listen. I think it's worth it. He every adaptation. Oh, hold on. Let me stop myself because I was about to say something really reckless. A lot of the Stephen King adaptations that I've seen, I've loved. I've legitimately loved. And The Shining to me is the definitive one to me. Like that's the one that like in my head is a Misery one. Am I
Yes.
sure? Okay. Misery and The Shining are up there in terms of like just staple movies, but The Shining is one that just between the music and the acting and the visuals that I just can't forget. Um, yeah, it just feels like the definitive Stephen King uh, one. But yeah, I really enjoyed the movie. Doctor Sleep, you're right. Like it's not necessarily scary in terms of like stuff I'm seeing on the screen, but a lot of the implications of some of the actions, like the little kid, man, like the little kid scene, like
Well, that's
messed with me
horrifying. Yeah,
pretty bad, you know?
in a different way than scary, I guess, in my
Yeah.
mind. Of just like that was a hard scene to watch.
Yeah. I mean, it is kind of this reminder that there are just evils in the world like that. You know, it's like
Yeah.
it exists. Like even if these characters are like, you know, magical beings that's, suck the life out of someone. The fact that people like that really exist in the world that would even consider an action like that is just jarring as a person watching it. But you're right, like didn't scare me too much, but it felt really special, and the thriller aspect of it really was special. The third act to me was like chef's kiss in terms of just bringing all of the visuals from from The Shining together, and then kind of subverting some of the ideas of it, and then some of the interactions that Danny has, just don't want to give anything away, but some of the interactions he has towards the end just feel very special, very iconic, and I, this feels like a weirdly, it's a couple decades between the first one and the second one, and this feels so special in a way. Like I've always wondered why people refer to it kind of uh, like a companion piece, and typically people don't do that for movies that are decades between, like a sequel that's a decades between the first one. But people talk about Doctor Sleep with this reverence that I see now. Like like I said, I kind of passively took it in the first time, but this time it had my attention, and it felt really special. The dynamic, especially between what's the character's name? The little girl.
Abra.
Abra, like as in abracadabra. Abra and Danny just felt like when they met each other, it was almost weird. They were like so cool, so quick, and he was just like, "Ugh, no, this is gonna look very weird." But
I know
they had like this really genuine connection that just we're the only people that know this thing in the world, which created this weird bond. And I mean, and there is something to that. Like I noticed like the creepiness of bonding with a kid is always kind of talked about, but you really do sometimes have like a cool connection with the kid. Like, man, you like this? I like this too. Isn't it crazy that Spider-Man can do? It's like these weird things that like only you can talk to this person about, and they just so happen to be younger than you, sort of dynamic.
Yeah,
and
or when you're a kid and it's
the other
cool
way.
uncle or someone your mom's friend or something who you can talk about something with, and you kind of feel like this is cool that I'm having this intellectual connection with somebody, and no, I think, but I like the way he refers to it. Like he's kind of like, this looks strange.
Yeah,
I have to
like
think about how this is going to come off. But I think that I would even say earlier I really think the movie, the 3-hour version, I don't think I had watched before. So I had seen the 2.5-hour version probably 2 or 3 times. I think I may have seen it 3 times, which is unusual for me because I talk a lot about rewatching movies on this show, but I don't really do it that often. Okay. I'm often watching something new. But Dr. Sleep, I think I saw once in the theater by myself, or maybe with you guys or something, or maybe was there a screening? I can't remember how I came to see it the first time, and then I saw it again with Henry, and I may have then seen it again with Henry and Nikki. So it's like I've seen this movie enough to know when I watched the 3-hour version, I was watching it going, I don't really see a lot of new stuff, but it was more like everything was just stretched out. It's like there's not a whole lot of additional scenes. It's just like longer dialogue scenes. If they go back and forth about a subject, like when he talks to Dick Halloran's ghost, those scenes have a little bit more detail. Throughout the film, there's a little bit more detail that refers back to The Shining, I think, more directly and ties it in. But there's also more explanation, longer scenes with the villains, where you get more explanation about what their plans are and how their situation works and everything. So I feel like it's an interesting thing. It really did feel even more like a Flanagan television show because it did feel a little long at 3 hours and change, but it didn't feel like it had a lot of extra stuff so much as it just had a lot of room to breathe and a lot of kind of character notes and things like that. So I it's an interesting movie to have watched this many times because it is an odd film in some ways because it really, when I said like an X-Men film, it does almost have more in common with a weird superhero movie than what you would call like the Kubrickian tone of the first one. Steve, I know that you've long enjoyed The Shining and you like this film a lot too. Like, do you know what I mean about the tonal difference? That it's like in this one, the way that the psychic powers are treated, it's and even the way the characters engage, the fact that you've got vampires that like sucks people's souls out and stuff like that. It's all very, for lack of a better term, kind of pulpy or comic booky. Whereas the original Shining kind of tries to not do that in almost every way that it can. I don't know. Did you kind of feel that difference in this movie?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like also like The Shining kind of treats, what's going on and the whole the shining element of a character or of the hotel as like the cause for the breakdown, of the characters in that first film. Where I feel like this one really kind of is focused on like recovery and the other side of that trauma.
Yeah.
Specifically with Danny, but and with the way you're describing the way that the shining gift or the superpower, if it's framed like that, it's kind of used as a part of that recovery, and like it's used for good, like you see how Danny is using it at the hospice place, like for a good, quote
Mm-hmm.
unquote. So like when something is good, somebody's got to try to take it away, and that's where the true knot comes in. They survive off of it, and it's like that idea is just a really great idea, from the book, in the movie, everything. I
Yeah.
haven't read the book, but I know a lot of friends have, and that it was a interesting adaptation of the book, and ways to pull in other stuff from The Shining, like you were saying earlier. But yeah, I love that setup of this idea that this legacy character, this character that a lot of people that know The Shining know Danny Torrance. It's a kind of it's an iconic character. Um, so yeah, I mean, to kind of follow him along, even if you're just speaking of this as watching the movie, even if you haven't read the book, like I haven't, it's interesting to see a character in recovery like that in a workplace, with people that are about to leave this life, and the way they use this gift for that, and to connect to other people like Abra, who has this gift, and even in a stronger sense than Danny has. It's like there's a hierarchy to their power, in this film, which I think is really cool, and even speaks to what you're getting at with the way it kind of feels a little like a superhero film. And and then you have that group of villains, and Rose the Hat, like Rebecca Ferguson's incredible in this movie.
She's so good.
I mean, just intoxicating. Like
She makes that silly
I
hat
love it.
almost work perfectly.
Yeah, it works, man. I think she's great. Some
I don't know if we've
incredible.
seen her like have this kind of this almost, how like in interviews she's almost weirdly like,
Yeah,
for lack of a better term, she's got like a flirty energy with whoever she's talking to.
yeah, she's
I
like a
feel
snake.
Right. I feel like in this film, she really, it feels like there's that kind of quality. Like there's something super
Yeah, she's
magnetic
definitely leveraging
and
that
hypnotic.
natural gift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, like the score is incredible. Working with the Newton brothers, and the cinematography is beautiful. There's a lot of really great sequences, like the whole like night skyscape astral projection stuff is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Like all those sequences are just amazing. I mean, and honestly, like it does feel like the comparison is right to say it feels like it's one of Flanagan's like TV shows. The universe that he creates with the time he has. But I feel like he has moments in those shows, where you really see some incredible filmmaking taking place, like some really great direction happening.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, and there's so many sequences in this film that you're just like, yeah, the same thing is on display. Like he's just a very special filmmaker. And and it's great to see, like I'm joking at the top of the show, but like he's one of our favorites, and like
Yeah.
you see a movie like this to take on the confidence to take on properties like this, even with this film not performing, and like plans for a prequel and a sequel and things like that just got scrapped when this movie kind of bombed. But you see the confidence that people kind of invest in him. He's working on the taking over the Exorcist stuff now, like these really landmark franchises that maybe he's able to do something special with. And it's really it's really sad that this movie didn't connect more. It's found much more of an audience in physical release and digital release. But I think Ronald's probably right. I feel like most people don't know what Doctor Sleep is. A lot of people don't know what Doctor Sleep is. Especially an audience that may want to see a Ewan McGregor movie, or an audience that may want to see Rebecca Ferguson or a Mike Flanagan movie. It's like there may not have been any association, even though the marketing tried to sell that. But if it had focused on being more of a Shining sequel, it may have found a bigger audience. But I love this movie. Like this is in like my top. I definitely, it was in my top 10 the year it came out. It might have even been in my top 5. I can't remember.
Yeah. Same.
But I remember seeing this with friends, and just being like blown away by it. Again, part of it is because I just do nothing but root for Mike Flanagan. I genuinely love. He's like one of my favorite filmmakers, and I love the director's cut and the commentaries and like the stuff he's done online about the making of this movie. And you get these little notes of like he builds this little universe of people that he works with a lot. Jacob Tremblay's in this. He's the kid in the brutal kid death scene.
Well, apparently had a great time filming that scene and got really into it. If you hear reports about that scene, he talks about how everybody on set was disturbed except for Jacob Tremblay, who was like wanting to push it, like, you know, as an actor really wanted to create something. And I do think that scene is hard to watch for that reason. Like the fact that it's a little kid crying out, like the way that he makes the evil. I mean, not that we doubted that these characters were evil, but he makes it really clear what exactly the evil that we're dealing with is in that scene. And, you know, I think shying away from that would have, you know, been more merciful on the audience, but it would have taken away one of the major kind of gut punches that's in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of stuff is just like Bruce Greenwood's in it. You know, we've seen him in some of the other Flanagan verse.
And his scene is made to look like the scene in the you know, the guy who was interviewing Jack Torrance for the job.
Exactly.
Or not so much interviewing, but I guess maybe that's an interview.
Or onboarding, I don't know.
Yeah, onboarding meeting. But it's like the same kind of angles in the same kind of office. And I think the movie does do that sort of Easter egg stuff that's like fan servicey. Yeah. But I don't think at any point, like I said, I don't think it really cheaply tries to replicate the qualities of The Shining. I do think it throws in iconography, and I do think that last act is like, okay, here's where all the member berries come out, you know, and this is what it's all about. But I still think the emotional rooting of that story, this is Danny Torrance now, as an adult, back in this place, it has weight with me. I love The Shining. I don't think you need to touch The Shining. Ronald, what you said about this being a companion piece is far enough away that it doesn't do anything to the original, you know, but it's good enough that it doesn't feel like an insult to this classic film, you know, and I think that is what's interesting about this. And I honestly think some of the most, you know, I don't know, moving stuff in this film is when he gets to the town in New Hampshire and he meets Cliff Curtis's character, and the guy like welcomes him to the AA group that's there and helps him find a room and stuff. Man, that stuff was just like it got me so emotional the first time, and the second time, and the third time, and this fourth time. It's like seeing that kind of kindness on display. And when he meets Bruce Greenwood's character, their interactions, you know, are just so, I don't know. There's something Mike Flanagan likes people. You know, if he has a flaw, it's that he likes people so much that he lets stories and monologues go on so long, you know. But I think this movie is a pretty measured version of that, where I love Danny's speech that he gives at his 8-year
so good
at the, you know, the group meeting. I don't know, and the way that recontextualizes Jack Torrance in a strange way is so. It's so interesting to have like a heartwarming idea about Jack Torrance, which is that, okay, yeah, he was a piece of shit, but up until the moment that the ghosts of The Shining or the ghosts of the Overlook got into him, he was trying, you know. And I think there is something kind of interesting about Stephen King's goal in that too, is to say that he wanted to write a story that would reflect a more optimistic view of someone struggling with their demons.
Yeah.
So... yeah, it held up for me. It hadn't been that long since I'd seen it, but it was like, you know, I liked having an excuse to really dig into it, and just remember how much this movie does that crazy thing of like, it's a sequel to the fucking Shining. It's like you wouldn't have thought you would have ever gotten that, and it would have been almost a joke, you know, on Entourage or 30 Rock or something. People would be working on a sequel to The Shining, and it would sound like such a bad idea, right?
Right.
But I don't know, something about picking up the story of Danny Torrance and actually the emotions of that are so heavy. And the heaviest thing in the film is when the ghost of that woman that ODs next to him comes to him and says, you know, they still haven't found us.
Yeah.
That is one of the most disturbing concepts.
It's rough.
But yeah, creepy and interesting and definitely full of existential dread. And when I say not scary, I'm not knocking the sort of depth of this movie. I'm just saying it didn't rattle me the way that, like, even when we get to the ghosts of the Overlook, they're more presented in this like ghost jumping out in a haunted house attraction, and much less like the sort of what's going on here feeling you get in the Shining. One other thing I think is worth mentioning though is I don't know the actress's name that plays Wendy Torrance, but she does such a great job of not doing an impression of Shelley Duvall, but sounding so much like Shelley Duvall and hitting the same kind of qualities that Shelley Duvall did in her performance. I think that is so amazing when an actor can remind you. Carl Lumley, similarly, of Scatman Crothers, when he plays Dick Halloran in this, it's like he doesn't do an impression, but he reminds you.
She's a Flanagan verse actress too. She was also what's her name? Alex Esso. She's in she's in Bly Manor. She's in Midnight Mass.
Yeah. I knew
she's in the Midnight Club. She's in House of Usher. Yeah, she's in I don't know if it goes even back beyond that, but yeah, I recognized her. But yeah, she's great. Yeah,
she gets this little flutter in her voice that's just like it's not like doing a Saturday Night Live sketch version of Shelley Duvall, but it's just like finding these little places to make you sure that, oh yes, it's supposed to be that character, and it's supposed to be that version of that character. I feel like that's the way that stuff works. Yeah. Good pick, Ronald. Even if you weren't sure that you'd watched it and then realized later you had, and then watched 3 more hours of it, or whatever the real story is, no one will ever know. We'll have to wait 40 years for someone to make a sequel to this episode.
Is that me next?
I think so.
Okay. My pick is going to be Memories of Murder.
Ooh.
Never seen it.
Mm-hmm.
In the wake of Parasite's dominance, and Bong Joon-ho taking over the Oscars in Hollywood that year, everything I read was about this movie, and I mean, everything I read about it had always seemed like something. How have I not seen the movie? Just how it's described, the plot, the trailer, like it just looks like an thriller, mystery, serial killer, detective, crime. Like it just check all the boxes for me. But I've never seen it, so yeah, I'm going to remedy that next week, hopefully with you too. I don't know if you guys have seen it before.
No.
Not
perfect. This is great. This is wonderful.
No. Memories of Murder.
We can all enjoy this for the first time together. Probably should have looked this up to see where it's streaming, but let me see.
Man, you did me a solid. Of course.
Tubi. Rent it by Amazon, all your standard channels, but yeah, it's streaming on Tubi. Look at that, Tubi coming through.
Coming through, B.
Or
any other channel you can find it on. But yeah, let's do Memories of Murder next week.
This was, Steve, you worked through miracles. This was just remastered.
I saw that.
Of course.
Steve likes to throw you a bone sometimes, Ronald.
Yeah. Throw me a freaking bone here. All right.
All right. So what's next? You got a couple of physical media things you want to talk about, Ronald?
Yes.
John, I want to get one.
Physical. Okay. First one. Maxine. Strange movie, but I think I loved it. Like, I don't love it as much as, X, my favorite. Second favorite, Pearl. Third favorite, Maxine. But Maxine still, although not a true horror film per se, it had some horror elements that I really enjoyed. I didn't enjoy that guy's balls getting stomped out, but that's neither here nor there.
Right.
And then the next one comes from London, England. I don't know why they packaged it like this.
Interesting.
But
it looks like a
screener or something.
Or I was going to say, it looks like a box, like a modem would have come in.
It does.
Oh, nice.
Nightmare on Elm Street deluxe version.
Nice.
I can't wait to watch this. New Atmos mix. It has a bonus disc that's not with the regular retail one for some reason. I'm not sure what this extra disc is, but it has the original and the uncut. The uncut's supposed to be 8 extra seconds, which doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know why they're like, so watch the uncut.
8 seconds goes a long way, man.
Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, the way that movies get cut to get a rating, sometimes it's like 8 seconds of nudity or of gore would be enough to get you down to that R rating. So it's possible there's like 2 seconds of boobs, 2 seconds of somebody's throat getting cut, 2 seconds of a dong or something. I don't know. You'll have to tell us.
I'll find out. Did you see that Heather Mellencamp?
Langenkamp?
Let's just be as lazy as possible. Have you heard
No.
about Heather Mellencamp?
Heather
No, no,
Mellencamp.
no. My sister.
John's
No, no.
twice removed cousin.
There's a very specific reason why I said Mellencamp. That's my sister's name on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
It's Rachel Mellencamp. It's stuck in my brain.
Yeah.
But it's based on that name. But yes.
Heather Langenkamp or Langenkamp. I don't know how to.
Yeah, there's like a new interview with her. I'm very excited about seeing.
Cool.
Yeah, those are my two. Very excited
cool.
about cracking those open.
Well, I would just say, just because it's the spooky season, and we just talked about a Stephen King movie based on a Stephen King book, and in the past we talked about the Stephen King show, The Outsider, that had the character of Holly. I don't remember her last name, but Cynthia Erivo played that character. And there was talk of spinning that character off or keeping to come back to them. And I don't know if they would, but if they did, maybe they would base it on the. Oh, hold on a second. Maybe they would base it on.
Maybe they base it on my hand.
Holly, the book that's currently next on my reading stack. So I don't know. I just thought I'd say Stephen King. I just got on a little kick with him recently. I haven't read his books in decades. And honestly, I can't remember the last one I read, but I read a book called Revival that was for a while up for Mike Flanagan to adapt it into a film, and then I think it fell apart. But I'd heard that it was a good choice because it actually had a solid ending, which Stephen King is famous for not really having the best. Like, his stories are so wild and weird that, like, sometimes his endings kind of just feel like, oh, and then some stuff happened, because his books are so weird and sometimes unpredictable and long and stuff.
Yeah.
But I'd heard Revival was one that actually was pretty tight, and I agree. And now I'm really tantalized. Revival should have been a Mike Flanagan movie. It would have been really good with his style. But so yeah, Holly is next on my stack, and I just thought I'd remind people Stephen King's still out there writing like seemingly 2 or 3 fat books a year still.
Wow.
And he like hasn't let up. And the guy, he's people call him Uncle Steve for a reason. He definitely is like a mentor and an inspiration to a lot of people. And people were occasionally you'll see that meme go around that's something like a lot of people that are into horror can name the Stephen King book that got them started when they were a kid, and it's sort of like he's been doing that for decades for readers. So I just think it's good to mention he's still at it. He's not just writing books that get made into classic films, by Stanley Kubrick 44 years ago. He's still doing it. And I also just mentioned a book I just read that was gonna be a Martin Scorsese movie, but I don't know now that he's kind of chilling out because he's getting too old to shoot stuff. But this book, The Wager, which is about a shipwreck and a mutiny and murders and court-martial, and it's insane. And I would just say, if you want to have a comfortable life, don't join the British Navy in 1741, because that is some rough stuff out there. Scurvy alone is terrible, and then you have all the storms and
all the other stuff
and fighting and stuff. So yeah, but sadly, I don't know what's happening with that project anymore. It's one more thing that Martin Scorsese was developing that sounded great, that I think might be now maybe we'll never get, if it's true that he's had to really scale back his. And I honestly can't imagine a guy his age shooting a film that is like an aquatic battle film. You'd have to be out on the water so much, and I don't even know if it was ever planned for him to be doing all of that shooting. But I would still, if you see any news about The Wager being made into a miniseries or something like that, it's prime material. It's got some amazing wild stuff that happens in it. And that's by David Gran, who wrote the book that Killers of the Flower Moon is based on as well. So,
oh wow,
good nonfiction writer. He's really good at like weaving together people's personal accounts of the time without pretending to say like, here's the absolute truth. It's more like, here's what this guy said, here's what this guy said, here's what this person said in a letter, here's what this person's journal said, Right. So you feel like you get a real, human take on a historical event like that. So guys, tell me about Smile 2.
Let's start with your immediate reaction when the movie ended.
It felt like a 90-minute kick in the balls, like constant kick in the balls.
How do you mean that? How do you mean that?
It's so intense, man. Like, okay, so, well, did you see the first Smile?
Yeah.
Okay, so that had some levity in it. This one doesn't have that.
People were constantly smiling. I thought it was really funny.
Yeah,
it's hilarious.
This is not have
comedy.
Yeah, it's like the moments, and I think some of it is because it's spread between a couple people. This focuses on only like a small group of people, and it is a direct sequel. Like it takes place pretty much, what was that, couple days,
7 days.
7 days after the events of the first movie. And I have to tell you, the first 15 minutes or so are the coolest opening for a movie that I think I've ever seen. I mean, like top 10 in the last like 10 years openings for a movie, especially a horror film. Especially a horror film. Like, I think that people are going to be talking about the beginning of this movie forever. Like, it just has like, it's a couple shots in it that are just what? It's so strange to begin a movie like this that is a horror film that I got to give it to him. I think that's one of the things that I could take from this movie. A lot of swings, man, like a lot of cool creative swings that I would not have guessed that a second movie would have brought to the table. The world opens up quite a bit, and
There's frowns in this one.
that's frowns. That's
There's
frowns.
some kind of straight mouth expressions.
So many pop star adventures going
There's the
on.
one where the mouth is curving down on one side but straight on the other.
Yeah.
There's that one.
So a lot of different styles of smiles and frowns. But yeah, I mean, we talked about it afterwards. I think I was really rough on it just because it is so much more.
Picking up.
Oh no, I don't know what to do when it happens. Where do I stop talking?
You know what you
Well,
should
no, you
do?
just-
You should smile.
Oh,
Just
okay.
smile. But no, you were saying you talked about it afterwards. You might maybe start.
Oh
back from
yeah,
that
yeah.
point,
Oh,
just in
stop
case.
talking about it afterwards, and I just didn't like how unrelenting it felt in that way. There were really no breaks in the torture of some of the characters, and that just didn't feel fun to me. Like I didn't think that this would feel fun to like a person came in with Smile that was like more of a communal sort of movie. Like it felt like the only thing I can really compare it to is the way that it felt watching it with an audience with Get Out. The way that it was like, oh shit, oh the smile, oh, fuck the person that's smiling. You know, that it's not like that in this movie. Like it doesn't feel quite as like communal in that way, but it is a very special horror film that is it's going for something. It gets, and I was surprised because it gets so fucking artsy. I'm like, is Steve gonna like this artsiness? And Steve said they stuck the fucking landing. I love it. He almost kissed me on the cheek. He's like, this,
yeah. It's like I felt comfortable. That's all I'm saying.
yeah, it really
So
does.
Ronald, you were put off by artsiness, and Steve was embracing it. I think that might be a movie schmovie first.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that we walked out and like he was saying what he felt and even telling the rep there, asking for reactions. And we made it to the lobby and I was like giving him space to I want to hear what he's saying.
Mhm.
And then at that I was like, it's funny that you say only God forgives because like we all know how much I love that movie. And I was like, but I gotta say, I think I like kind of love this movie. You know,
And my
But
friend
yeah.
Blake was like, it's the same way. He's like, I fucking
Yeah, he was
love
like, me too.
it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no, like it's I think this movie is pretty great, to be honest with you. Like I think Parker Finn, the filmmaker who did the first one, this one, and the short that this whole series is based on, is a really interesting filmmaker to watch, especially to seeing if he stays in the horror space, what else he does outside of Smile as a franchise. But I think, yeah, everything felt bigger and more intense. And they're obviously working with a bigger budget. The first movie made was a word of mouth hit, made over $200 million worldwide, which is incredible. And hopefully this movie does well because, yeah, I think it takes a really kind of interesting character in the lead role, much like in the first film. You have a character who there's a lot of ambiguity to like, their past and, where they are in their life and, kind of how they handle this thing that's happening to them when they start to piece together what's happening to them. How they expose this character to this curse, this being, this demon that taunts you for 7 days is really kind of creative, and it ties into the opening that Ronald mentioned, which I think is really great, and it does pick up like I said 6 or 7 days after the first one. if you saw how that movie ended, you probably know where this movie picks up or how this movie picks up, which is, it was a relief to me to see it kind of continue on like that, which is really kind of a fun way to kick this movie into the next gear. Because I think it takes, there's an interesting thing that Rana was saying, like in how the first movie felt, because this movie opens like that first movie felt. And then when something happens, we get into New York City, we get into the pop star world, we're taken into the Drew Barrymore show. You know, this is in some of the trailers, so I'm not spoiling anything here. But this movie centers around, you know, a pop star who is being inflicted with this curse, this following, this thing. So it's a really interesting perspective to see someone dealing with this kind of experience, someone who's already kind of managing their own kind of stress and trauma of life and the pressure of being a pop star, you know, all these things that make their life probably crazy already. To then navigate the insanity that comes as the days count up with this demon. So yeah, it's unrelenting. There's some incredible cinematography in the movie, some awesome shots like through the city as she's kind of going through the night and trying to figure out what's going on with her life. Naomi Scott, who plays Sky, the lead of the film, is incredible. Honestly, like it's, I mean, I would say it probably is the star making turn. Most people who know her probably know her from the live action Aladdin remake, or maybe Charlie's Angels attempt at reboot. But I mean, this is genuinely like her movie, and it's really, she's incredible in it. She's so good.
She's acting her ass off. I mean,
she's great.
There's like a point where like I don't know how a horror film does this, but some of the twists, some of the best twists of the movie aren't even horror twists. They're more like character developments,
right?
That you find out like this kind of, through this curse, you're finding out more things about who she was as a person, and that alone, this character study of this person is just some of the best writing I'd seen in a while. Like some of the best, and the fact that it happens to be in a horror film is kind of crazy. Like I read a review that said that this was a lot of the same, and I don't know what fucking movie this person was watching where they said this was the same thing that happened in the first one. Like I don't think this person watched the first Smile at all. Like it felt like they didn't, because these are like night and day sort of movies, and in the best way possible. Like in the way that it made me think about the way that we took in Halloween, and we were seeing how the franchise changed a little bit. This is opening up the world to like, after this second one, I don't know what the fuck's gonna happen. Like you leave out feeling like, oh my God, like almost like a Avengers Part 1 sort of ending. Like it's that crazy of an ending where you're like, how is this gonna change the world that we're in? How, like, what's gonna happen in the third one?
Right.
Because there's no way that there's not gonna be a third one. So I don't know. I don't know. The more I talk about it, the more I think but it is rougher to watch. Like it is not as fun in that way. I can honestly say that it didn't feel as fun, but that doesn't mean that it was bad, or like I don't know if I could watch this movie with everybody. I don't know if everybody's gonna feel like, man,
Right.
they'll be like, man, this was fucking sad.
I mean, I think that's what works so well about it, to be blunt. Because
Yeah.
I mean, if you've seen Smile 1, you know that's a pretty bleak film.
Yeah,
Like, you know, the movie ends on a pretty bleak note for a lot of characters that you know, if it's doing its job, you have some sort of care for.
yeah.
And I think this movie plays around with those ideas a lot throughout the whole movie in terms of how bad can it get for a certain character and for your lead. But I mean, it does an interesting thing. Again, I think that the big hook of the pop star life is a really intelligent choice, and it kind of frames things around a lot of things that, you know, younger, you know, Gen X, millennials, like whatever other younger generations are called. Like they're tied into all these things, you know, social media, how they, you know, these pop stars' lives are never really turned off. So they never really have a chance to really kind of like try to understand what's going on in their life, you know?
Right.
Like it's always on. Like every effort that she makes in this movie, there's somebody watching or there's somebody filming, you know, which just escalates like the anxiety and all this stuff that she's already dealing with, which I just think makes the movie so much more tense. And yeah, again, there's some of the stuff's in the trailer. Like the trailer kind of does give away a lot of the really cool sequences, but there's still plenty in this movie that's not in the trailer that's just as kind of like whoa, that's pretty wild, you know? Like so it's definitely a recommend for me. Like I'd probably say one of the better horror movies this year, especially like more of the mainstream kind of. It's got the jump scares, it's got the creature kind of shot.
Yeah.
You got it, kind of got it. The first one that's dialed up even more. So there's plenty there in terms of delivering on those expectations. But yeah, Smile 2 I thought was great.
It was great. I just want to say one thing. One thing that I was very afraid of is that Trap, because it deals with a pop star, will step on the toes of this movie. And I think it can for some people that honestly are maybe saving up their social battery for one movie to see this year. And if you have a choice between maybe you skipped on Trap because you're like M. Night Shyamalan is sometimes unreliable. We can argue about that later. I don't necessarily agree, but some of his movies aren't the best. I will say this. This is a great take on that pop star whole experience versus the Trap experience. So, you know, if you're going to see a movie that involves pop singers this year, see Smile 2. So.
All right. What's next?
Well, I don't know. There's a topic connected to a film, so I guess I will just mention that out of sheer curiosity for this film that is sort of taking the maybe not so much taking the world by storm right now, but definitely surprising a lot of folks by beating the Joker 2 in its second week. Terrifier 3 was the #1 film in the U.S. this past weekend, and has already made $30 million on a $2 million budget, and I think maybe another $5 million or so was spent on marketing. It's a little bit unclear, but it's already well into profits. And this is a film that the filmmakers had a chance to get a lot of studio money and tone down the vision of it and deliver an R-rated film, or have less control over their film. Right. And they took the chance that they could release it independently. It's not rated. It's long. It's super gory. The fact that the Terrifier films are so totally not my jam is totally separate from the fact that a movie with this level of independence and this level of creative control sort of not only did it get around the kind of studio rejection that it was experiencing, but in far fewer screening rooms than a film like Joker 2. It beat the pants off of that movie this week. And, you know, so I guess there's two different phenomena happening there. One is this type of movie, what Terrifier 3 was able to do with a real sort of grassroots appeal. This is a very midnight movie kind of movie to see. I mean, like, it's, if you've seen the other ones, you know, the style is you know, there's a kind of hammy B-movie style to the acting, and there's a kind of amateurishness to some of that aspect of it. But it's practical effects and a very specific vision, I guess you might say, of a guy, director Damien Leone. I think that's his name. Is that his name? Yeah. Or Leone, who, you know, has an idea and has stuck to it. And whatever you want to say about these movies, who don't particularly like them, even I admit that, like, Art the Clown is an iconic image that works. And if you walk into like the Spirit Halloween store, you'll see Art the Clown hanging up next to Michael Myers and the witches and the hockey masks and all that stuff. And it fits in. It's like somebody has created something new. Maybe not since, I mean, maybe I'm wrong about this, but maybe not since like Ghostface. Has there been like a new addition to that kind of pantheon where you could so easily sell the mask and people can recognize it? And I think the fact that it's a younger horror fans kind of midnight movie, gross out film, and the movies are so extreme. And I'm not like it's not. I don't have like a prudish avoidance to the violence, but I'm not like necessarily in horror films for this kind of extreme, kind of misanthropic gore. It's just not my particular style. But Art the Clown is a disturbing image, and frequently the performance. I should know the name of the guy. What's his name?
David Howard Thornton.
David Howard Thornton, that's correct. I mean, I don't know if he's like a trained mime or a trained clown or anything like that, but I do think like his movement is there's humor to be found in some of the stuff that Art does that is totally a physical comic performance by this guy, and he does kind of carry the film in some ways. And there are moments where it's like, despite not liking the movie, despite not liking the kind of tone it is, and thinking it's kind of, I mean, honestly, there's some terrible dialogue and terrible acting in this movie, but there's also moments that did kind of scare me because of how unsettling it is to look at Art the Clown and live in that world and know that it's coming, that you're going to see awful things happen to people and it's going to be lingered on in that way. So yeah, all of that, the movie aside, I'd love to know what you guys think of this kind of twin phenomenon of the sort of upstart movie that could, and maybe what lessons you think the studios are going to try to learn from this. And then the other is is it fair to say colossal failure in some ways? I mean, I know that Joker 2 is on its way to earning back its budget, but that's worldwide and in a squeaker. You know what I mean? Like, it's definitely not the movie it's not a follow up to a $1 billion movie based on popular IP. Even with all of the talk that Todd Phillips was trying to make a comment and kind of piss off the fans of the first movie, it's like, I don't believe he wanted to piss them off this much. Right. I don't even know if I agree with all of the reasons why people have avoided this movie. I didn't see the first one, and I plan to watch both of them, I guess, at some point. But you guys have seen the first one, and you guys must have been watching this whole thing. So what do you think of those twin phenomena and how they kind of intersected? We had clown versus clown in America's cinemas last weekend, and obviously it's strange. Art the Clown won over the Oscar-winning, Joker movie.
Yeah. I really like the first Joker. I saw the first Terrifier, didn't see the second and third. I thought that the first Joker was really good. The second one didn't look appealing at all after a while. Like, the first trailer, I'm like, okay, it could be a musical. And then like as the stuff started going, I was excited, but I was noticing that the marketing just didn't feel good. Like that, it just didn't feel quite as exciting. All the scenes that they showed didn't look like they had developed anything beyond what we saw in the first movie. So I was very scared. Terrifier is this really interesting thing, and I think it works for some unsettling reasons. But I'll say it doesn't have any political agenda beyond freedom of speech. And that is something that we all can agree we need in some ways and we don't need in some others, right? It doesn't really have an agenda beyond just being what it is. Unadulterated, crazy, violent fun to some people. And that in the middle of I guess a change in directive, I'd say, in terms of like diversity being king, very specific stories being king, that a lot of people are against. And they don't blame just bad stories being told. It's the diversity. It is solely the diversity. That's why it's failing, which isn't true at all. Just terrible stories are being told in between all the diversity. This movie represents that kind of, and it is the complete opposite of that. It just feels like somebody's vision that doesn't feel like it's being careful, that doesn't feel like it's being shameful about something. It is just the unadulterated vision of this person. And something about that feels very freeing and fun to people. Even if you're like not even if you're not anti-woke or whatever this new thing that people are saying about anything that has any diversity in it. I just mean that it represents just the opposite of that feeling. And that to me is so fucking fun. Even for a person that is, I am super liberal. You know what I mean? Like, even for somebody that is so pro stories like that being told, I know what this represents to a lot of people. You know, it just is anti any of that energy, any agenda beyond just the vision. And that's something about that is kind of cool. Um, Even though this isn't my cup of tea, I know the symbolism. I know that people kind of feel like these things can exist in this world, and then Terrifier comes in the middle of and kind of shakes shit up. It can exist. You know, these sorts of visions can exist, and diverse things can exist, and super stupid things can exist, and all these things can exist in one movie landscape. And I love that people are going to see this movie, by the way.
Right.
That makes it even more special. I implore you to listen to the latest episode of The Town, where they talk to the Cineverse guy, and he talks about the strategy that they developed. And it's some secret sauce.
Talking about the company that helped, I think,
Yes.
put up the marketing money or something. There was like
Yeah,
a
so
particular thing that they provided. So maybe
so
elaborate on that a little.
the first Terrifier was a whole different company,
Yeah.
but they took on the second Terrifier just because Bloody Disgusting had kind of indicated through their staff that there felt like there was a groundswell when it came to this movie. Like, there felt like there was something special happening, and they noticed that the first Terrifier was doing really well through their service, so it did the distribution for it on their service, but didn't put the movie out. So the second one, they completely tried to fund in a lot of ways and promote in a very in their through their services. So essentially, it was like the movie came out and you could watch it on Cineverse shortly after, and then they advertised it like mad through their service. So it's like this like symbiotic relationship that, and then Bloody Disgusting also championed it like crazy. So people are like getting
And that's
the
a
most,
website / whatever content provider
yeah,
about
yeah,
with horror themed stuff, but it's movie news in general.
yeah. And they kind
Just a
of become the
platform.
definitive place for like just kind of like mainstream horror, yes, but like some
Yeah.
of the like up and coming indie. I mean, Mike,
Indie
they're
stuff, yeah.
indie stuff. They're huge Mike Flanagan fan. You know what I mean? Like, it's like this like in between. It's like this cool mixture of stuff, but it especially indie directors. And so he kind of became the darling of this company. The Cineverse guy was kind of like, let's throw some money at it and see what happens. And then Terrifying 2 does gangbusters, right? They fund the third one, and then it's the best thing they've ever put out in the history of their company. So they're making this money, and apparently the movie didn't cost much, and then the promotion they're saying was $500,000 or something like that.
Oh
Because
wow, that's less than I thought. But either
yeah,
way, they did a much more. It was a very grassroots, web based
yep,
kind of word of mouth campaign, and I
yeah,
honestly I feel like Terrifier can do that
yeah,
because Terrifier already has the sort of whatever you want to call it, like I said, midnight movie or drive-in movie or something.
yeah,
It already has that built-in kind of cult film audience,
yeah,
and they were able to capitalize on it in a brilliant way. I mean, I felt like I definitely saw the marketing for it, but I guess it's just because that's in my feed. It's in
yeah.
my
So you feel,
it's in that existence that you have online. I saw that people were psyched for this, and again, as someone who doesn't really love them, or even particularly like them, I did see. Oh yeah, there are people for whom this is a highly significant horror series.
yeah.
And there's a part of me that's like, oh, that's. I hope. I do want to get to that question of what lesson we think they're going to try to learn from this. But Steve, I'd love to hear what you think about some of this clown versus clown energy in the box offices of America.
I mean, I think it's just two examples of a filmmaker or a studio or whatever you want to classify it as, like swerving into the lane of their target audience's expectations, and another filmmaker kind of like taking a bigger swing and doing the opposite of maybe what the people that drove Joker to $1 billion worldwide film
yeah
may have expected for it. I mean, DC and Warner Brothers, like they're in a interesting thing with all these properties that have anything to do with DC, and I think it's just another decision. And I haven't seen Joker 2, but everything I've read about it is very clear. That uh, it's kind of playing on expectations, subverting them. What you want or where you think Joker 2 is going to go is like basically the opposite of that. And that's not going to do you any favors for box office, for trying to repeat any kind of worldwide gross like the first one.
That's where that low cinema score comes from, right? Is like
Yeah,
failing to meet expectations. It's less about the quality and more
exactly.
about what people thought they were going to get versus what they got.
Yeah,
And again, we're not saying that makes it a bad movie at all. None of us are saying that 'cause
clearly,
we
haven't
seen
seen
it.
it. I'm just speaking of you look at the
failure to
numbers.
connect.
Yeah, you look at the numbers and you look at this idea around what these metrics that they collect, like you said, CinemaScore, the week over week drop off, what theater counts look like, and things like that. And to say that Joker is struggling to get to 50 some $million domestically is mind blowing.
It is, man.
And I mean, honestly, it's not benefiting from where comic book quote unquote movies are right now.
Right.
The fatigue that's been described, a lot of the same kind of that. There's more of the same, that mentality, even if it is a movie that made $1 billion. Captain Marvel made $1 billion. You know what I mean? It's just like if the product's not there, it's not.
Well, that's an interesting comparison because the Marvels was another like for what expectations were a sort of seismic flop.
Yes.
Although I feel like the Marvels arrived, it kind of limped into theaters a little bit, whereas Joker 2 didn't feel that way to me. It felt like it was ready to blow people away, and then it just didn't happen. And what was weird was I saw some people that were like, the people I saw being kindest to the movie were the people who were kind of intrigued by the swing, as you're referring to.
Yeah.
And the people who I saw that were just not even bothering to see it were the people who I think of as kind of the partisan movie bro types, but they got wind of the fact that it was a musical and that it was designed to piss them off.
Yeah.
And they just didn't go. Like, they didn't feel like I have to see it, as we so often do with movies like this. Like me going to see Terrifier 3 and sitting down with my Cheetos and my icy and just going, okay, here we go. But like, you sign up sometimes for a movie because you feel like you're supposed to see it. And somehow Joker 2 went from that movie that was coming on the horizon to a movie that like everyone just sort of dodged. It was a weird phenomenon. I mean, honestly, when that happened, I don't know if you guys ever feel that happen with a movie that's big, and then when it's like that weekend goes by and you go, okay, well, I'm not going to be one of these idiots I'm not going to judge a movie based on its first weekend. But sometimes when you don't hear anybody talking about how great something is, and you don't hear anybody telling you, man, you got to see this, or no, it's actually really great, and it you kind of go, ouch, you sort of sense that a movie again didn't land
absolutely
properly.
And just to kind of go back to my comparison, like you talk about the Terrifier series, and all they can do is play into it. They have an iconic character, a new character, a character that they have complete ownership over. And they can do whatever the hell they want with it. And they're doing what audiences want to see be done with it, based on performance of the first two movies and interactions with this character at conventions. And it's a very grassroots thing, this Cinevision, and, the networks that they own, like that article, the pod that Ronald was talking about, The Town with Matt Bellany, like they were just going through things like how this Cinevision built up, this organic grassroots approach to buying Bloody Disgusting, Bloody Disgusting advising them on what properties to try to, acquire, Terrifier 2 specifically. And, they have this whole network of podcasts, and they have all these things that they're leveraging to promote this series. And
so
it's
they're
really
our competition. We basically should not be supporting them.
Yeah, that's fine.
We're
We're all complimentary here. Yeah, it's just a really smart playbook. I mean, that's what they describe it as, a playbook, and they have an approach to a movie like this. They keep the margin, they keep the budget small, so the margins can be gargantuan. Like a movie that costs $2 million, they spent $500,000 in marketing, so 2.5. They've already got a multiple of nearly 15 times that already, and it hasn't even had a full week in theaters,
Right.
So it's like the sky's the limit on what it can do, how it can hold around the holidays. Smile 2, we talked about earlier, coming out, is another horror movie on the marketplace. It'll have an impact on legs, but it could go the other way. People might be catching on the Terrifier, and it might hurt Smile 2.
Yeah.
It's got the momentum right now. And what you said
Terrifier 3
about
is also a Christmas movie. So it can have not just
Oh,
utility
wow.
into the Christmas season,
Yeah.
but it can become a next year, the next year, the next year. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? It can
yeah.
become like a programmer
Wow.
of sorts.
yeah, no, it's
If you need
it's
a
a really
midnight Christmas
exciting,
movie.
and I just to echo, like I'm not a fan of what I've seen of the series so far, but I am a huge fan of seeing independent horror succeed, seeing new horror icons in the marketplace. Like I love anything that gets the horror community excited, even if it's not for me, because
Mhm.
maybe the next one will be for me. It's like I'm all about that organic growth, and this is something that's been extremely organic, and to see what they've been able to do with the franchise of films, and specifically like John was focusing on, with introducing a new icon, I would say, into the horror marketplace, like Art the Clown. Yeah, I think Ghostface, maybe Jigsaw would be the next one.
Yeah, you might be right.
If there's been a couple in that time, but it's not a common thing. You're talking, you know 25 years plus, and you've got two, maybe three now, and it's like
Yeah.
it's an achievement. So it's kudos to everybody involved.
So you kind of alluded to it, Steve. The fact of like what this means for the future. What do you think? Like, what lessons can the studios even take from this kind of outlier movie? But is it going to be Is it going to be? And maybe Ronald too. What do you think? Is it going to be super gore? Is it going to be funding these kind of sideways movies that are sort of outside the system? You know what I mean? Like, what are they? What can they even try to do to respond to the success of this movie? Because they're big on trying to learn lessons from successes like this, and it's not always the right lessons that it seems like the studios learn.
I mean, when I hear stuff about, I think sometimes we get caught up in numbers. I listen to the Jordan Peele and God, what's the name of it? It's called Annuity or something like that. But it's a Ryan Coogler's podcast. He interviewed Jordan Peele.
Mm.
And one of the things that he said was like he had this idea for this movie, Get Out. He knew that once he kind of talked about the nuances of it, he had to do the movie. And they said, yo, we'll give you $4 million to do the movie.
Right.
Which to the average person that listens to budget for movies sounds like not enough money. To somebody like Jordan Peele, who thought he would have no money to do this movie, that sounds like an infinite amount of resources.
Right.
And I think that we're experiencing this with Art the Clown. Like, for what this man can do,
Mm-hmm.
for the stories he can tell, that budget is like an infinite amount of money to him, and he's going to make it look the way that he wants to make it look, and that appeals to people. I think that we're seeing a factory in Blumhouse with these micro budget films create these powerhouse sort of films out of micro budgets. I think that we're gonna see Blumhouse is gonna be in the same breath as like A24 fairly soon. I mean, if it isn't already. For horror, it is, right? But I think it's going to be more in the general conversation, because the model that we're talking about is their model. I mean, they made it popular, and I think that they're going to continue to make smart moves and pick up films and create new horror, people, and they tend to have these concepts that are so catchy. You're like, oh, okay, a little doll that does flips and also kills people, and the dancing campaign that they had. Like, I think that stuff is so fucking cool that we're just gonna see a ton more of the Blumhouse strategy kind of becoming more of a thing. And I think that people are going to fake it. Like, I think we're going to see a lot of bigger companies kind of do like, oh, this was an indie funded movie, but it's really, if you follow the breadcrumbs, it's going to be like Sony funded it. You know, it's like when we follow the breadcrumbs, and I think we're going to see more things that have an indie feel to it that are going to be called indie that are like offshoots of bigger companies. So that's my theory in all of it. I don't
But
know.
they're going to try to create the sense of a grassroots feeling around a
Yes.
movie, as opposed to, you know, Longlegs kind of did that with the quirky marketing and stuff that
Oh
was
yeah,
like
I liked
very
it.
targeted, but it didn't
Yeah.
feel. I mean, it felt like you know, a real movie, but it
Yeah.
also felt like it was the marketing was interesting. Like it was definitely
Yeah.
knowing how to find the people. That movie had a big response, partially because they got the hype going. You know.
Yeah, for sure.
And so what? Yeah, what do you think, Steve? Do you think you're going to see this kind of? Is that kind of gore going to ever become something the studios start producing? I mean, I guess
I
that's
don't
the
think
whole
so.
nature of like unrated films. I think is the other piece of that. Is like you know, to make that kind of movie, it has to be unrated.
Yeah.
But at this point, that doesn't seem to be hurting this movie. I mean, I know for a fact that you know, Henry's 16, and he and a friend went to see Terrifier 3 over the weekend, and I was like, you saw that? And, you know, and he was like, they let him go, and I was like, I would have thought that
Right.
unrated meant something to the box office, like NC-17 or something, but I guess not. So my son's 16. He's a you know, you could look at him and totally believe he was a little bit older than that.
Yeah.
But he looks. He's not a convincing adult, so I don't think anyone would think he's a grown man. But I was surprised when he said he was going to go see that. I was like, I don't even know if you can go see an unrated film, bud. And then he said they had no problem. So, you know, that's something to think about.
Right, right.
That's yet another topic.
It's neither here nor there. That is
But I mean,
wild.
like that's a lot of who's going to see this movie. And what's funny
Yes.
too is he didn't seem particularly fazed by it. Like it didn't seem like to him it was this. Oh my gosh, can you believe how rough this movie is? He was
Right.
like, oh, it's just not 80% gore. The story wasn't all that great, you know. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay. But I do think that, you know, again, young audiences are gonna. There's a certain amount of credibility that Art the Clown has that, you know, a legacy killer that we might be more interested in seeing. You know, those it might not be as might not capture that audience as much.
I think Ark's the first TikTok guy. Like, I feel like he's the first organic tick. Like, Aaron's
know.
niece is talking about Ark the Clown. Like,
Yeah.
like
I'll say Megan kind of caught on too.
oh yeah, for sure. But
Yeah.
like the way that like people are sharing these clips of Art doing all this crazy shit, it's like,
Yeah.
you know, this kid shouldn't be 13 and know about Art the Clown, but she knows about him and wants to see the film and doesn't mind the blood, wants to see people get chopped in two. And I'm like, goddamn TikTok, man.
Wants to see a guy get a chainsaw stuck up his ass. That's a spoiler, by the way.
Spoiler alert.
Oh no.
But don't you think Art the Clown also ties in with, when you say he ties in with like TikTok world, he ties in with that kind of creepy pasta, Slender Man kind of,
Yes.
or urban legend
Slender
thing? Because
Man.
there was even like the creepy clowns that people were spotting in real places, and people dressing up as clowns to like,
Yeah.
you know, freak people out.
Yeah.
I feel like Art the Clown there was a moment that they were able to capitalize on, perhaps just by virtue of being young filmmakers
Yeah.
working in that time. They kind of knew how to present this iconography in a way that would be really, you know, catching to people. Honestly, the worst thing about the movie is the sort of mythos or lore, in my opinion. There's a kind of legendarium behind it that they're trying to get at in this movie,
God.
and it's just really not working for me. He's much creepier as a mysterious being that shows up in these odd places and kills people. When you get into like what demon is possessing what host and that kind of stuff, it starts to, you know, wear even more on my nerves. But no, I guess, you know, we've definitely that felt like a show there. But I know there were some other big releases that we've seen. Does anybody want to rattle off some thoughts on some other big movies?
Well, I mean, we were going to talk about the substance, but I mean,
Yeah.
I think maybe, but I mean, we could wait. I mean, because Ronald's probably going to see it in the next
I'm
week.
gonna see it for sure.
So I mean, we could just all talk about it next week and not worry about spoiling anything.
Well,
for
what do you
him.
think, Ronald? Do you think you might see it in the next week? Because we can
For sure. I'm for sure. I was
Oh.
gonna see it. I had planned on seeing it, but the time just got weird.
So for
Crazy.
listeners, that's like a second required viewing for next week. we'll also be talking about the substance.
Yes.
So you can see that. And I guess also if we want to talk about the Penguin, which I definitely do, we can check in on it after next week because there'll be another episode to bring into our thoughts.
Cool.
But just short response is I'm digging the shit out of the Penguin. I think it's a pretty darn good show, and I think that Victor and Sophia are incredible characters.
Yeah.
You've got like 3 leads on this show now, and I really love that they've done that. And also, just Colin Farrell is amazing, but we'll talk more.
Cool. Reminder: next week's required viewing. 1A is Memories of Murder. 1B is The Substance. Movieschmovie.com is the website you can go to listen to past episodes or just to jump into a subscription to the show on whatever podcast platform you may prefer to listen to podcasts on. And you can also do youtube.com/movieschmovie podcast if you prefer to do the visual option. They also have audio only there. So you can just, you're covered no matter what you prefer. Pick your poison and hopefully you continue to listen. Thank you if you are listening. I'm assuming you are if you heard those words. And if you're not, someone's hopefully told you about us. And if they haven't, they should be. You know the deal. And
I would honestly say if any of the people in your life that haven't recommended Movie Schmovie to you, you're done with them. Cut them off.
You're done, son.
Yeah, it's that time of year. You got to put priorities on these things. And if it hasn't happened this far, 428 episodes plus.
Yeah. Andy
if they
Dick
say,
did
why are you doing this? Say, you know what you
know why you did.
Or
it.
you know what
just
you did.
Turn around and walk away.
Andy Dick had this sketch where he had like a reality TV show. He's like, you're cut.
You're cat.
with the cross. Okay.
Yeah.
You could do that,
You got to watch the video to see what kind of hand motion.
Watch the video on YouTube.
So Laird. So we'll be back next week. Thank you so much for listening or watching. And as always, you've made our day. Thanks.